You're throwing your life away on some ridiculous fantasy. Get out and don't come back, my mom screamed, her face twisted with rage as she pointed toward the front door. The words hit me like a physical blow, echoing through our family home in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I stood there in the living room, my laptop bag still slung over my shoulder, staring at the woman who had raised me but never truly understood me. My name is Jenna Hale. I'm 28 years old, and I had just made the mistake of telling my parents about my decision to leave my corporate accounting job to focus full-time on my online business. What I hadn't told them, what they couldn't have imagined, was that for the past 2 years and 3 months, I had been the one secretly paying their mortgage. Every month, I transferred $2,400 from my business account to their bank, making sure they never lost the house they loved so much. But standing there, watching my mother's face contort with disappointment and my father's silent nod of agreement, I realized that my financial support meant nothing if they couldn't respect my choices. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were rejecting the very person who had been keeping them afloat. "Mom, if you would just listen for 1 minute," I started, but she cut me off with a sharp wave of her hand. "I don't want to hear another word about your little computer games," she spat. "You had a good job with benefits, security, a future, and you threw it all away for what? To play on the internet all day?" My father, Gerald, finally spoke up from his position by the fireplace. "Your mother's right, Jenna. This isn't what we raised you for. We expected more from you." The disappointment in his voice was worse than my mother's anger. I had always been closer to my dad, and hearing him dismiss my dreams felt like a betrayal. What made it even more painful was knowing that without my monthly payments, they would lose this house within weeks. The very roof over their heads depended on the success of the computer games they were mocking. "Fine," I said quietly, shouldering my bag more securely. "I'll go." My mother, Patricia, looked surprised that I wasn't fighting back, but her expression quickly hardened again. "Good. Maybe some time on your own will help you come to your senses." As I walked toward the door, I turned back one last time. "You know what, Mom? Maybe it will." There was something in my voice that made both of them pause, but they said nothing as I stepped out into the cold October evening, closing the door behind me with a finality that would soon change all our lives. Growing up in the Hale household had always been about meeting expectations. My parents, both in their early 60s now, had built their lives around traditional ideas of success and security. My father worked for 35 years as an insurance claims adjuster, and my mother had been an elementary school secretary until her retirement 3 years ago. They owned a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, complete with a well-maintained garden that was my mother's pride and joy. What they didn't know was that their comfortable retirement was largely an illusion. My father's pension was smaller than they had anticipated, and my mother's medical bills from her diabetes had eaten into their savings. I discovered this by accident 2.5 years ago when I stopped by to help them with their computer and saw past due notices scattered across my father's desk. That night, I went home to my apartment and made a decision that would define our relationship for years to come. I had been building my graphic design business, Sunspire Digital, since college, working nights and weekends while maintaining my day job. The business had grown beyond my wildest expectations, bringing in nearly $8,000 a month. Setting up an anonymous monthly transfer to my parents' mortgage company seemed like the natural thing to do. I told myself I would eventually reveal the truth, but somehow the right moment never came. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every casual phone call was an opportunity I let slip by. Maybe I enjoyed being their secret guardian angel, or maybe I was afraid they would reject my help if they knew it came from my hobby business. My relationship with my younger brother, Tyler, had always been complicated. At 25, he was their golden child, married to his college sweetheart, working as a high school teacher, living what our parents considered a proper, stable life. Tyler and his wife, Stephanie, lived in a modest apartment across town and visited every Sunday for family dinner, a tradition I had participated in religiously until tonight. Tyler had been supportive of my business endeavors, at least privately. He understood that I had a talent for design and marketing that went far beyond what I could express in a corporate cubicle. But he also struggled with disappointing our parents, so he rarely spoke up when they criticized my choices. The warning signs of their financial trouble had been subtle but consistent. I noticed my mother buying generic groceries instead of name brands, my father mentioning that they might need to postpone their planned trip to visit my aunt in Colorado, and the way they both looked slightly stressed whenever bills came up in conversation. What I didn't anticipate was how explosive their reaction would be to my career change. I had prepared for concern, for questions about my financial stability, even for some disappointment. But I hadn't prepared for complete rejection, for being thrown out of their house like I was some kind of stranger who had violated their trust. As I drove away from their house that night, I felt a strange mixture of hurt and liberation. For the first time in years, I was free to make decisions without worrying about their approval. The first few days after leaving my parents' house passed in a blur of conflicted emotions. I threw myself into my work, completing client projects with an intensity that surprised even me. My apartment, a cozy one-bedroom space downtown, had never felt more like a sanctuary. Without the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, I found myself more creative and productive than I had been in months. But beneath the surface, I was wrestling with a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. Every month for more than 2 years, I had carefully scheduled that automatic transfer to their mortgage company. The next payment was due in just 3 weeks, and for the first time since I had started making them, I questioned whether I should continue. On the third day after our fight, Tyler called me. His voice was cautious, almost apologetic. "Hey, Jenna. I heard about what happened with Mom and Dad," he said. "I'm sorry it went down like that." "Are you?" I asked, not trying to hide the edge in my voice. "Because you were sitting right there when Dad agreed with everything she said." There was a long pause. "You know how they are. They just want what's best for you." "Do they? Because it feels like they want what's comfortable for them, not what's best for me." Tyler sighed. "Look, maybe you could come to Sunday dinner this week. Let things cool down a little." "I don't think so," I said. "Mom was pretty clear about not wanting me back." "She didn't mean it like that. You know how she gets when she's upset." But I wasn't ready to forgive and forget. Not this time. "Tyler, did you know that my little computer games bring in more money each month than Dad's pension?" "Really?" His surprise seemed genuine. "Really. But apparently that doesn't matter because it's not a real job." We talked for a few more minutes, but I could tell Tyler was uncomfortable with the conflict. He had always been the peacekeeper in our family, the one who smoothed over tensions and encouraged everyone to just get along. This time, though, I wasn't interested in keeping the peace. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at the banking website where I managed all my business finances. The mortgage payment was scheduled to process automatically in 17 days. All I had to do was nothing, and it would go through as usual. Or I could cancel it with a few clicks. The rational part of my mind argued that I shouldn't punish my parents financially just because they had hurt my feelings. But another part of me, the part that had been dismissed and undervalued for years, whispered that maybe it was time they understood exactly how much they depended on the daughter they had just thrown away. I closed the laptop without making any changes. Not yet. But for the first time since I had started those payments, the decision felt like mine to make. 2 weeks passed without any contact from my parents. I had expected at least a phone call from my father, maybe an awkward attempt at reconciliation, but there was nothing. The silence was deafening and, honestly, more hurtful than their initial reaction had been. It confirmed what I had suspected for years, that their love came with conditions, and I had failed to meet them. During this time, my business continued to thrive. I landed a major contract with Lumerin Publishing, a Minneapolis-based company that needed a complete rebrand. The project was worth $15,000 and would keep me busy for the next 2 months. Ironically, it was exactly the kind of success that proved my parents wrong about my career choice. but I had no one to share it with. I did share the news with my best friend from college, Maya Rodriguez, during one of our weekly coffee dates. Maya had been watching the situation with my family unfold with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "I still can't believe they reacted that way," she said, stirring her latte with more force than necessary. "You're literally living your dream and making good money doing it. What more do they want?" "They want me to be safe," I replied. "They want me to have a traditional job with a traditional life path that they can understand and explain to their friends. But you're 28 years old. When do you get to make your own choices?" Maya's indignation on my behalf was comforting, but it also highlighted how isolated I felt from my own family. She had been encouraging me to tell my parents about the mortgage payments for months, arguing that they deserved to know where their financial security was really coming from. "You know what I think you should do?" Maya said, leaning forward with the intensity she always brought to problem solving. "I think you should tell them about the mortgage, right now, before you make any decisions about stopping the payments." "Why would I do that?" I asked, though part of me was already considering it. "Because they need to understand what they're throwing away. They need to know that their successful daughter, the one they just kicked out, has been keeping them in their house." The idea was tempting, but it also felt like using money as a weapon, which wasn't who I wanted to be. Still, as the days passed and the payment date grew closer, I found myself thinking more and more about Maya's suggestion. The decision was made for me on a Thursday evening, 10 days after our fight. I was working late when my phone rang, and Tyler's name appeared on the screen. "Jenna, we need to talk," he said without preamble. His voice was strained in a way I had never heard before. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately concerned. "It's about Mom and Dad. Something's happened, and I think you need to know about it." My heart started racing. "Are they okay? Is someone hurt?" "No, nothing like that. But they got a notice from the bank today, something about their mortgage payment being late." I felt my stomach drop. "Late? What do you mean late?" "I don't really understand it all, but Dad called me in a panic. He said the bank was threatening some kind of action if they don't catch up on their payments. He asked if Stephanie and I could help them out financially." The irony was almost unbearable. Here was my father, asking Tyler for money to solve a problem that I had been preventing for more than 2 years. And Tyler had no idea that the person who could fix everything was the same person they had just rejected. "What did you tell him?" I asked carefully. "I told him we'd help if we could, but honestly, Jenna, we don't have that kind of money. A mortgage payment on their house has to be at least $2,000 a month. That's more than our rent." "Did he say anything else? About why they might be behind on payments?" Tyler was quiet for a moment. He seemed confused about it, like he thought the payments were up to date. But the bank was saying they hadn't received anything for this month. I closed my eyes, finally understanding what had happened. In my emotional state after the fight, I had forgotten that I needed to cancel the automatic payment if I didn't want it to go through. The system had tried to process it as usual, but something had gone wrong. Maybe an issue with their account, maybe a technical glitch. Either way, the payment hadn't gone through, and now my parents were facing the consequences of their financial reality. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, staring at my phone. Tyler's call had kept me awake most of the night, wrestling with what felt like an impossible decision. On one hand, my parents had made it clear that they didn't want me in their lives. On the other hand, they were about to lose their home because of a situation they didn't even understand. I picked up my phone 3 times to call them directly, and 3 times I put it back down. What would I say? "Hi, Mom. I know you kicked me out, but surprise, I've been paying your mortgage for over 2 years." The conversation felt impossible to navigate. Instead, I called Tyler back. "I need you to do me a favor," I said when he answered. "I need you to ask Dad some specific questions about their mortgage situation." Okay, Tyler said slowly. What kind of questions? Ask him how long they've been able to make their mortgage payments without any financial strain. Ask him if he's ever wondered how they've managed to stay current while living on just his pension and Mom's Social Security. Jenna, what are you getting at? I took a deep breath. Just ask him, Tyler, and then call me back. An hour later, my phone rang again. Jenna. Tyler's voice was strange, almost whispered. Dad said something really weird. He said they've never actually made a mortgage payment themselves. He said the bank has always told them the payments were coming from some kind of automatic system set up by the mortgage company. He thought it was part of their original loan agreement. My heart sank. Of course, my parents hadn't questioned their good fortune. Of course, they had assumed that somehow, magically, their mortgage was just easier to manage than they had expected. Tyler, I said carefully, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise me you won't say anything to Mom and Dad until I decide what to do. What is it? I've been paying their mortgage for the past 2 years and 3 months. Every month I transfer money from my business account to the mortgage company. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long that I thought the call had dropped. Tyler, you've been... What? His voice was barely above a whisper. I found out they were struggling financially a few years ago, and I started making the payments anonymously. They never knew it was me. Jesus, Jenna, that's thousands of dollars. It's $57,600 to be exact. Another long silence. And you never told them? I was going to eventually. But every time I tried to bring it up, they made some comment about my business being a hobby or a waste of time. How could I tell them that my hobby was keeping them in their house? Tyler was quiet for so long that I started to worry he had hung up on me. Tyler, I'm here. I'm just processing this. So when they kicked you out, I decided maybe it was time they understood exactly what they were rejecting. So you stopped the payments. I didn't actively stop them. I just didn't fix whatever went wrong with the automatic transfer. Jenna, they could lose the house. I know. My voice was steadier than I felt. The question is, what am I supposed to do about that? They made it clear they don't want me in their lives. Tyler didn't have an answer for that, and honestly, neither did I. All I knew was that for the first time in years, my parents were about to learn what their lives looked like without the daughter they had taken for granted. 3 days later, the call I had been expecting finally came. It wasn't from my mother or father. It was from Tyler, and his voice carried a weight I had never heard before. Jenna, you need to know what's happening over here, he said. Dad called the bank this morning to try to figure out the payment situation, and they told him that for the past 2 years, the payments have been coming from an external account. Someone has been paying their mortgage, and that someone stopped this month. I felt my pulse quicken. What did he say? He was confused at first. Then he started trying to figure out who could have been helping them. He went through all their relatives, their friends, even wondered if there was some kind of mistake or if someone had the wrong account number. And? Tyler's voice dropped even lower. Mom started crying. Not angry crying, but scared crying. I think for the first time, they realized how close they've been to losing everything. The image of my mother crying hit me harder than I expected. Despite everything that had happened between us, she was still my mom. And knowing she was scared and confused made my chest tight. Tyler, did either of them... Did they think about me at all? That's the thing, Jenna. Dad asked me if I thought you might know anything about it. He said you've always been good with money and computers, and he wondered if you might have some insight into who could have been helping them. The irony was almost painful. My father was asking for my help to solve a mystery that I had created. What did you tell him? I didn't know what to say. I told him I'd call you and see if you had any ideas. We both fell silent. I could hear Tyler breathing on the other end of the line, probably wrestling with the same moral dilemma that had been keeping me awake at night. "Jenna," he said finally, "you have to tell them. This isn't just about money anymore. They're terrified. They kicked me out, Tyler. Mom literally screamed at me to get out and never come back. I know, and that was wrong. But this is bigger than your fight about your job. They could lose their house. Then maybe they should have thought about that before they decided my life choices were more important than having me in their lives." Even as I said the words, they felt harsh. But I was tired of being the one who always had to be the bigger person, the one who had to swallow her pride and make the first move toward reconciliation. "I need time to think," I told Tyler. "The next payment isn't due for another 2 weeks. They're not going to be homeless tomorrow." "But Jenna, 2 weeks, Tyler. I need to figure out what I want to do." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling like I was carrying the weight of my entire family's future. Part of me wanted to simply resume the payments and pretend none of this had happened. It would be easier, cleaner, and it would solve everyone's immediate problems. But another part of me, the part that had been dismissed and undervalued for years, wanted them to understand exactly what they had lost when they chose to reject me. I wanted them to know that their financial security had depended entirely on the daughter they considered a failure. The decision I made in the next 2 weeks would define our relationship forever, and for the first time in my life, that decision was entirely mine to make. 2 weeks later, my father called me directly. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my hands shaking slightly as I pressed the accept button. "Jenna." His voice was tired, defeated in a way I had never heard before. "We need to talk." "About what, Dad?" I kept my voice neutral, though my heart was racing. "About our mortgage situation. The bank says someone has been making our payments for over 2 years, and then suddenly stopped this month. Tyler said you might have some idea about who could have been helping us." The moment had finally arrived. I took a deep breath, looking out the window of my apartment at the city below. "I do have some idea," I said slowly. "In fact, I know exactly who's been making your payments." "Who?" The hope in his voice was painful to hear. "Me, Dad. I've been paying your mortgage for 2 years and 3 months. Every month, $2,400 from my business account to your mortgage company." The silence stretched so long that I thought the connection had dropped. "Dad? That's..." His voice cracked. "That's impossible. Your business is just a hobby. You don't make that kind of money." "My business brings in about $8,000 a month, Dad. Those computer games Mom mocked have been keeping you in your house." I heard him put the phone down, then pick it up again. In the background, I could hear my mother asking what was wrong. "Jenna, are you telling me that all this time, the daughter you just kicked out for making irresponsible life choices has been the only reason you haven't lost your home? But why didn't you tell us?" The question I had been dreading. "Because every time I tried to talk about my business, you dismissed it. How could I tell you that my little hobby was supporting you?" Another long silence. "And when Mom told me to get out and never come back, I decided maybe it was time you learned what life looks like without the daughter you don't respect." "Jenna, please. We didn't mean..." "You did mean it, Dad. And now you're facing the consequences." The next day, both my parents showed up at my apartment building. I watched from my window as they stood outside the main entrance, my mother clutching my father's arm, both of them looking smaller and older than I remembered. They had been there for 20 minutes when I finally went downstairs. "Jenna," my mother's voice was barely a whisper. She looked like she had been crying for days. "Please, we need to talk." "Now you want to talk?" I asked, not moving from the doorway. "We made a mistake," my father said, his pride visibly crumbling. "A terrible mistake." "Which mistake?" Kicking me out? Or not realizing that your successful daughter was keeping you afloat? My mother stepped forward, her hands shaking. Jenna, I was wrong. About everything. Your business, your choices, the things I said to you. I was wrong. You weren't just wrong, Mom. You were cruel. You told me I was throwing my life away on fantasies while I was literally paying for your life. We didn't know, she said, tears streaming down her face. If you had known, you would have taken my money and still looked down on how I earned it. My father spoke up, his voice stronger now. That's not true. We would have been grateful. Would you? Or would you have felt ashamed that your daughter was supporting you? Would you have demanded I get a real job anyway? Neither of them could answer that question, and their silence told me everything I needed to know. The bank sent us a foreclosure notice, my mother said quietly. We have 30 days. That's unfortunate, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. I guess you'll need to figure out a solution. I turned to go back inside, but my father's voice stopped me. Jenna, please, we're begging you. For a moment, I almost relented, but then I remembered the look of disappointment in his eyes when I told them about leaving my corporate job, my mother's harsh words, the way they had dismissed years of my success. You made your choice, I said. Now live with it. The consequences for my parents were swift and unforgiving. Within 6 weeks, they lost the house they had lived in for 15 years. Their pride, which had seemed so important when they were rejecting my life choices, crumbled as they were forced to move into a small rental apartment on the outskirts of Minneapolis. My father, who had always carried himself with quiet dignity, looked broken whenever I saw him around town. My mother, who had been the social center of their neighborhood, became a recluse, too ashamed to face friends who might ask about their sudden downsize. Tyler, caught between loyalty to our parents and understanding of my position, watched helplessly as our family disintegrated under the weight of pride and missed opportunities. As I built my business into a 6-figure enterprise and moved into a beautiful downtown loft, I often reflected on the strange power of silence and consequence. Sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't what you do, it's what you choose not to do, and what that choice reveals about the people who never truly saw your worth.